What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports. We are here on the SEC channel at the voice of college football, and I'm going to give you my post-spring power rankings. I did not do pre-spring power rankings this year. I just missed it this time, but so this is really the first time we're doing power rankings, and it's not an official preseason power ranking either because the rosters are still changing. Players are still being added to these rosters to finish them out. And I tell you what, the SEC is pretty tough. I think your top two teams are pretty clear. Your bottom two or three teams are pretty clear. But then you look at the rest of the SEC, and I think it's very even. I think it's a very, very tight race. So let's just get right into it, and we'll start with the bottom, and we'll start with Vanderbilt. I think it's pretty obvious this team was the worst team in the SEC last season. This year, I don't really see anything that makes me think Vanderbilt's going to be all that better. They lose some of their key players from last year's team. And I guess the good news is you do have Ken Seals coming back at quarterback. That's the one good thing going for Vanderbilt. But they didn't do a whole lot in the transfer portal. Some key guys are gone. I don't really expect Vanderbilt to be much better. And I think they will, once again, be the worst team in the SEC coming up in 2022. Number 13 is Missouri. Missouri is a team that, they made it to a bowl game last year, but were they really that great of a team? I don't know. You look at Connor Bazelak, he transferred out of there. They lose some key players as well, really on both sides of the ball. So I'm a little hesitant on Missouri and thinking that they're going to be all that good this year. I think they will be down here towards the bottom. Tyler Batty gone. That's a big loss for them at running back. The passing game, I just wonder, are they going to be able to throw the football? Probably going to lean on Brady Cook this year at quarterback unless they add a transfer. Elijah Young back at running back. Expect him to maybe step up and be that guy for them there. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, just not a lot of talent coming back for them on the offensive side of the ball. Not a lot to get you excited, to think that this is going to be a really explosive offense. They lose a couple of their better offensive linemen as well. And then on the defensive side, that's probably where they have the biggest losses. All three levels, they lose some guys on the defensive line, at linebacker as well, secondary. So again, just not a lot to get excited about if you're a Missouri fan. They do have a lot of guys coming in the transfer portal. They did a pretty good job there, so we'll see how all those pieces fit together. I would say I think Missouri is going to be significantly better than Vanderbilt, so we're kind of heading into another tier here. I'm not saying that, they're one spot away, 14 and 13, but I do think Missouri will be significantly better than Vanderbilt this season. Nathaniel Pete, a transfer coming in from Stanford. We'll see if he can contribute there in the run game. Joseph Charleston, safety from Clemson. They've got some guys coming in. Two guys coming in from the transfer portal that are both named Tyron Hopper. How about that? One from North Carolina, one from Florida. I found that interesting. So they've got some reinforcements coming. We'll see how it all works out for them. I wonder about the explosiveness of this offense. Will they have that? Will they be able to go toe-to-toe with some of the top teams in the SEC? I'm a little hesitant on believing that they will be able to do that. Number 12, the Auburn Tigers. An interesting team, but just a lot of question marks. And just the overall roster talent for Auburn is not what it has been in recent years. They got a really interesting quarterback battle going on there. I don't know how that is going to play out. We saw Bobby Ashford look really good in the spring game. Calzada didn't get to play. He's injured. TJ Finley. If TJ Finley is their quarterback, I don't think the ceiling is all that high for this Auburn team. I just don't. They've got Tank Bigsby coming back and Jarquez Hunter. A nice 1-2 punch there at running back. And a lot of guys coming back on the offensive line as well. Really pretty much everyone. So they should have a good run game. That's the good news. But again, the quarterback position, can someone step up there, and can some receivers step up and help them in the passing game? Not a lot of production coming back, and so I don't. It's kind of like with Missouri. I don't know if this offense is going to be all that explosive. Should be able to run the ball, sure, but are you going to be able to make those big passing plays when you need to? On the defensive side, Jacoby McClain is a huge loss at linebacker. He was their leading tackler last season. I think they're going to miss him. Lose some guys up front as well, but they've got, I think, enough depth and talent there on the defensive line where they should have a pretty strong defensive line. Should have a pretty strong pass rush. That'll be, I think, pretty solid for them on defense. They lose some good players in the secondary. Roger McCreary is gone. Smoke Monday, two big-time leaders for them in the secondary. They'll have to have to depend on some young guys to step up there. So I think Auburn is kind of in a similar place as Missouri, where they're not Vanderbilt bad, but I think they're a little bit behind these other teams. But when we're talking about teams 3 through 12, like I said a second ago, I mean, this SEC is very, very competitive, going to be very competitive this year. It's very close, and trying to figure out these teams, and I should say through 11, 3 through 11, I think it's very, very close. And I could move these teams around and really any different kind of order, and I think it would at least be a respectable power ranking video. I think there will be plenty of arguments, and if you want to move some of these teams around, I'm not going to argue too much because it's very, very close. But let's get into it. This next group of teams, the best way I could rank them, we start with number 11. That is Florida. I got Florida here as kind of the worst of these teams, but they could wind up being 5th or 6th in these power rankings. I mean, it's just so hard to tell. New coaching staff. Anthony Richardson, we saw him at times look like a superstar last season. Limited playing time. What's he going to be able to do once he is the consistent starter? That'll be a big story to watch. They've got talent at running back. You got Lorenzo Lingard, Demarcus Bowman. We really haven't seen a whole lot from them. I'm actually looking at the transfer from Louisiana to come in and step up there. Hey, he could wind up being a guy that starts for them. I'm talking about Montrell Johnson. Was really good for Louisiana, so he might actually wind up being the starting running back. We'll see how that plays out. At wide receiver, they do lose Jacob Copeland. Kamor Gamble at tight end, another loss for them. Justin Shorter will be back. They've got some young, talented players there at wide receiver. So I think, it's all going to come down to Anthony Richardson. If he's a Heisman contender, this Florida team is going to be near the top of the SEC or have a good chance to maybe get there. I do worry about the defense a little bit. Also, the offensive line. They haven't been that great in recent years. They lose Stuart Reese. They lose DeLance. We'll see how the offensive line looks this year for them. Some big-time players, though, on defense. They lose Jeremiah Moon, Zachary Carter, Chris Bogle. He entered the transfer portal. Newkirk. I mean, they lose a lot of guys up front. Tyrone Hopper at linebacker. Diabite at linebacker. Gone. These are big losses. Kyer Elam in the secondary. Big-time cornerback for them. He is gone. So they don't lose a ton in terms of a quantity of players on defense, but they lose some really good ones. And so I'm really curious to see what this defense is going to look like. Are they going to kind of step it up? You do have Ventrell Miller coming back. He'll be a leader for them at that linebacker spot. Gervin Dexter, big-time potential player. Look for him to be an anchor there in the middle of that defensive line. And besides Elam, really everyone else is back in the secondary. So they do have some talent there. Again, with the new coaching staff, how does it all come together? I think that'll be the biggest question for them. And then, how good is Anthony Richardson? Does he prove to be the real deal now that he'll be the full-time starter? That's what I'm going to be watching here with Florida for sure, because they have potential. They have potential to be much higher in these rankings once we get into the season. Number 10 is South Carolina. And again, razor-thin margin when trying to separate these teams. Spencer Rattler coming over at quarterback. How good is he going to be? Again, a lot of these teams, it's going to come down to their quarterbacks. That was a big-time get for them. A huge improvement there at quarterback. Austin Stogner also coming over from Oklahoma at tight end. He will be big for them as well. Terrell Dawkins, a defensive line transfer from NC State. Also, Christian Bill Smith has a chance to be really good at running back coming over from Wake Forest. Antwain Wells from James Madison, a wide receiver who should step up. So they did a nice job adding some impact players through the transfer portal. They've got other talented players there at running back. Marshawn Lloyd, he should be good for them this year. Juju McDowell, also a very talented. So they've got some talent at skill positions. Josh Vann will be back at wide receiver. Several other players. Marion Brown, a speedster. So a lot of weapons around Spencer Rattler. I think this offense will be much improved this year. I mean, they're a dark horse. They're a dark horse in the SEC East. I don't know if they're going to have the talent to match up with a team like Georgia. But again, when you look at these teams, Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, I think all of these teams have a chance to push for that number 2 spot in the East. It's going to be a really interesting race there. Jaheim Bell at tight end also back. So they have no shortage of weapons on the offensive side of the ball, and they bring almost everyone back on the offensive line as well. Really all their starters coming back. So this offense should be much improved. You look at the defense, they lose Aaron Sterling, they lose Engabar, so a couple of really good defensive linemen there. Jabari Ellis as well. Not a ton of losses, though. Jalen Foster, probably the biggest loss on defense at safety. They will be missing him for sure. But they do have some guys coming back. Cam Smith, one of the top cornerbacks in the country, I think, this season. So this is a talented South Carolina team. A team that, you look at how they finished last year. If they can take that momentum into 2022, I really think this team has potential to push for that number 2 spot in the East. But just overall talent-wise, I just don't know if anyone has the talent to match Georgia, even with everything that they lost. We'll see how that plays out. But South Carolina definitely in the running to be that number 2 team, I think, in the SEC East. Tennessee comes in at number 9. This is another team that should be really explosive offensively. I think one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country last season, Hendon Hooker, he will be back. They have plenty of talent around him. They've added some guys in the transfer portal. This offense should be very strong for them. Cade May's the only big loss on the offensive line as well. So look for Tennessee, just like South Carolina, to have a very good offense. They should be pretty explosive on that side of the ball. My question mark for Tennessee is going to be on defense, and I think for South Carolina as well. Both of these teams, how good are they going to be on defense? That's maybe why they're a little bit behind Kentucky for me, because I think Kentucky, we know what we're going to get from that defense from them. But, yeah, looking at this defense for Tennessee, they weren't great last year. They do lose some pretty good players. They lose Blakely, a defensive end. Also, Matthew Butler on the defensive line. He's going to be gone. Alontae Taylor at cornerback, a huge loss for them. Theo Jackson at safety. So even though this defense wasn't great last year, they're going to lose some really talented players from that defense. And it'll be really, if Tennessee has a chance to compete and maybe take down Georgia, possibly, it's going to come down to that defense. I don't know if they have enough talent and depth, just like with South Carolina, to really challenge Georgia, but they could be a dark horse. You never know. This East is going to be really interesting behind Georgia, and Tennessee definitely in that group of teams. Moving on to, how about we'll go to the West now with Mississippi State at number 8. I originally, when I was just putting this list together in my head, I was going to put Mississippi State probably down around 10 or 11, but when I really looked into the roster and what they have coming back, this team has a chance to be pretty good. Will Rogers is back at quarterback. Really got it going late in the season last year. It's working out pretty well in the air raid with him leading the charge. He will be back. They've got weapons at running back. Dylan Johnson, Jaquavius Marks, guys that can catch the ball out of the backfield, which is what you need in this air raid offense. They do lose Malik Heath, and Mekhi Polk is probably their biggest loss on offense. That's a big-time player there for them at wide receiver. But they add Jordan Mosley from Northwestern, also Justin Robinson from Georgia, so that'll give them some depth to go along with some guys coming back. And it's not like no one's coming back. Austin Williams will be back. Jaden Wally will be back. He has a chance to have a really big year this year. So I think that the offense will be just fine. Charles Cross at tackle, big-time player for them. They will definitely miss him, and also Scott Lashley on the other side. So you're missing 2 big offensive linemen there. But I think they have enough depth where they'll be okay. Maybe a step back on that offensive line, but they should be okay. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, though, this team brings pretty much everyone back on the defensive line. Aaron Brule, the only guy really you're losing there at linebacker. Looking at the secondary, Martin Emerson will be gone. That's a pretty big loss there. But Emmanuel Forbes, one of the most underrated defensive backs, I think, in the country. He'll be back at cornerback for them. That'll be big. And they've got depth. They've got guys with some experience. So I think the defense for Mississippi State should be pretty strong. I think a little bit better than they were last year. Offensively, they should be just fine. Probably the biggest concern is that offensive line, losing a couple of key players there. But Mississippi State should be in good shape. I think they will be a very interesting team to watch in the SEC West. Moving on to number 7, here is Kentucky. I mentioned them just a minute ago. Are they the one team that could potentially challenge Georgia? I just don't know. I just don't know if they're going to have enough talent, enough depth. That Georgia team is just filled with 5 stars, and we've seen, when Kentucky's had good years in the past, they just really haven't been able to compete with Georgia. I don't know if that's going to be any different this year. If they can get an explosive passing game going, maybe Will Levis will be back. I think he has a chance to have a really strong year for them. A run game should be just fine. Chris Rodriguez, of course, coming back. McClain will be back. Smoke will be back. So they're going to be able to run the football. I don't really have any doubts about that. They do lose Josh Ali and Wan'Dale Robinson. Those are 2 pretty big losses at wide receiver. Who's going to step up and be that explosive guy for them? Well, they do have a couple of transfers. Javon Baker coming in from Alabama, Tavion Robinson from Virginia Tech. So you're talking about two guys that I think can really step in there and fill those roles. And if that passing game, I should say, can give them some balance on offense, Kentucky, and we saw that last year. They were much better in the passing game. So if they can continue that, this offense could challenge that Georgia defense potentially, and this could be the team that maybe takes them down. I do have some concerns on the offensive line. Dare Rosenthal is gone. That's a big loss. Luke Fortner is gone. That's a big loss. Darian Kennard, a huge loss. So you're losing three really, really talented offensive linemen, but they've done a really nice job of kind of reloading on that offensive line. Kentucky has had one of the more consistent offensive lines really in all of college football lately. They do add Tashawn Manning from Auburn. We'll see if they can develop him. So yeah, that's my one area of concern, I guess, on offense. Looking at the defense, Josh Paschal, a huge loss. They will definitely miss him. But going down the rest of the list, not too much really going to be gone from this defense. Corker at safety will be a pretty big loss for them. But overall, they lose some guys, but they have a lot of their key guys back as well. DeAndre Square, Jacquez Jones back at linebacker. You've got Jordan Wright also coming back. Justin Rogers on the defensive line will be back. So there's a lot of depth on this defense. We've seen them now consistently be one of the top defenses really in the SEC. I think that will continue. And really just a nice job building this program by Mark Stoops. And I think it'll continue to be a really good year, another really good year for Kentucky this year. But it's going to be a dogfight in the SEC East with those other teams we talked about. Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky. That's going to be really fun to see how that plays out. Moving on to number 6, we've got Arkansas. Arkansas, a team that a lot of people are high on. I think they're going to be pretty good. I think KJ Jefferson coming back at quarterback is obviously going to be huge for them. They've got Sanders and Green back to run the football. Trey Knox back at wide receiver. Ketron Jackson, Warren Thompson, some very good players at wide receiver. They will miss Treylon Burks, obviously, but they bring in Hazelwood at wide receiver, and that's a big-time get for them. I mean, that was a huge pickup in the transfer portal. I think he could be that number 1 wide receiver for this Arkansas team. Offensive line, you look at Cunningham, he's gone. Clary is gone. They lose some other guys, but more like kind of role player, backup players. So I think the offensive line will be okay for them. Do have some losses, do have some shoes to fill. We'll see how that plays out. Trey Williams on the defensive line will be gone. That's a big loss for them. Dorian Gerald, John Bridgeway also gone. Utsey. So you're missing some players there. And then at the linebacker spot, losing Grant Morgan is going to be, that's a huge loss, a big spot to fill. But they do bring Bumper Poole back. Depth at linebacker, it's something I'm a little bit concerned with Arkansas. They had several guys leave. We'll see if some of the players from the transfer portal can step up for them, especially Drew Sanders coming over from Alabama. He could be really strong, really good, I think, on this Arkansas defense. Looking into the secondary, Monteric Brown at cornerback, going to be a big loss. Joe Fauci, he transferred out of there. But they do bring back most everyone else. Miles Slusher will be back. You also look at the safety spot. Catalan will be back. Of course, he was injured last season. Cornerback, probably a big concern for me if I'm an Arkansas fan. Dwight McGlovern coming over from LSU will be, I think, probably a starter for them, but that's an area of concern. If they go up against a really good offense, a really good passing offense, I wonder a little bit about these cornerbacks for Arkansas. Brenny, safety from Georgia, also a guy that should step up and help them in the secondary. But overall, again, Arkansas should be right there in the running, I think. And again, Alabama, Georgia, they're kind of in a league of their own, and I think they will be again this year. But I think the race for number 2 in each division is wide open, and Arkansas definitely has a great shot to make a run there and finish number 2 in the SEC West. Let's go to number 5. We got LSU here at number 5. I've been getting higher and higher on this LSU team. I love what they've brought in the transfer portal. They've added some key players and really filled a lot of their areas of need. I mean, you go down the list of just a ton of players they've added. Joe Fauci, just talked about, from Arkansas, should be good for them. Greg Brooks as well, cornerback from Arkansas. Noah Cain going to help them out in the run game. Kyron Lacey at wide receiver from Louisiana. I mean, you can go look at Bernard from Oklahoma State, big-time player in the secondary. Jaden Daniels, quarterback. And what I love about LSU is the fact that they have Jaden Daniels, they have Miles Brennan, and they have Nussmeier. So they've got 3 guys, and out of 3 guys that could potentially start for them, I think when you've got 3 guys, that means one of them more than likely is going to step up and be good. And which one will that be? We'll have to wait and see. But I feel like with 3 guys that can all be really productive, one of them will definitely step up. And they're going to have a lot of talented wide receivers to throw the ball to. This is a really good wide receiver group. Keyshawn Butte leading the way there, of course. They've also got Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Jeray Jenkins, Chris Hilton. I mean, a really talented group of young wide receivers. You got Betch, you got Taylor there at tight end. They're going to be really good, I think, on the offensive side of the ball. Offensive line, we'll see how that plays out. Ed Ingram, a pretty big loss. Shanahan at center, also a big loss. Chasen Hines, Deculus. So they're replacing some pretty good talented players here on the offensive line, but they've recruited really well. They've got good depth. Added some players from the transfer portal. I think they'll be okay there. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, should be a really strong defensive line. Really good pass rush with B.J. Ojolari and Ali Gay. Those 2 guys coming after the quarterback, you're usually going to be in pretty good shape. Mason Smith there on that defensive line, going to be big for them. Linebacker, losing Damone Clark is going to be big. We'll see who can step up there. Maybe it's Baskerville. Maybe it's one of these other guys. Mike Jones. Linebacker position, something that I'm a little concerned with if I'm an LSU fan. And then in the secondary, some of these transfers I think will fill some of the holes that they had. And, they had a lot of injuries last year, so a lot of young players were able to play. And I think that's going to bode well for LSU this year. You'll have those young guys with some experience who also bring in some transfers to help out. How will it work with a new coaching staff? That'll be the biggest key, I think. But LSU, I think, has potential to have a really good year this year. Moving on to number 4, we've got Ole Miss here at number 4. A lot of people, I think, sleeping on this team. They think because of everything that they lost that they're going to drop off. I disagree. I think Ole Miss is going to be really good this year. If you look at what they added in the transfer portal, I mean, they added exactly what they needed. All of these guys they added are going to come in and contribute right away, I feel like. They didn't just add players. They added positions of need and guys that I think are going to be able to come in, step up right away for this team. If they did not do what they did in the transfer portal, Ole Miss probably finishes towards the bottom of the SEC. But they added, I think, again, I just really like the pieces that they added in the transfer portal, starting with quarterback Jackson Dart. I think Jackson Dart will be really good fit with this Lane Kiffin offense. I think he will step in here and be, we've seen the numbers that you can put up in this offense. I think he's going to be able to do some big things for them. And then you look at what they added at running back in the transfer portal as well. Julius Bentley from SMU. Maybe you hadn't heard too much about him. I think he's going to be big time in this offense as well. 2 big pieces for them on that offensive side of the ball. Jonathan Mingo will be back at wide receiver. They do lose Drummond and Sanders. A couple of big losses there at wide receiver. But they also added in Malik Heath from Mississippi State. And at the tight end position, they bring in Michael Trigg. I think that is a big pickup from USC. He'll have a chance to step up right away for them as well. So offense, I'm just not worried about this offense with Lane Kiffin calling plays. Offensive line, Ben Brown is gone. Also, Umana at center will be gone. But I think they'll be just fine. They added Mason Brooks from Western Kentucky on the offensive line. And again, I think losing 2 guys is not too big of a deal. They should be just fine there. Defensively, Sam Williams is a huge loss. I'm going to miss him there on the defensive line for sure. I'm going to lose Momo Sanogo as well, Chance Campbell, Lakia Henry, Mark Robinson. Yeah, they were talking about some pretty good players there at linebacker that they're going to have to replace. And that's the one area where they didn't add a whole lot. If I was going to complain about one area for this team, it's linebacker. They added Troy Brown from Central Michigan, but that's about it. So a great job on the offensive side of the ball, filling these holes, but linebacker, we'll see how that plays out. They're going to be pretty inexperienced there. And then you look at the secondary. A lot of guys coming back. They will miss Jalen Jones and Kedron Smith. They'll miss some of these guys. Jake Springer, some good players. No, not anyone that's going to be a huge loss for them. Hasheem Young from Iowa State. He comes in, and I think he's going to fit in, probably start right away for them at safety. So I think, again, when you look at what they did in the transfer portal, I think Lane Kiffin did a nice job. And because of that, I think Ole Miss will be right back near the top of the SEC. I've got them number 4. Number 3 is Texas A&M. I do not have Texas A&M way ahead of these other teams like some people. I think Texas A&M is closer to Ole Miss and Arkansas than they are to Alabama and Georgia. When you look at what they have coming back from last year, this team really shouldn't be super great. I mean, this should be a good quality team, but this was not a great team last year, and they lose some key pieces. Isaiah Spiller gone at running back. That is a big loss. Weidemeyer gone at tight end. They lose Jameer Johnson, Kenyon Green on the offensive line. And you go to the defensive side of the ball, a lot of losses there as well. It all comes down to the recruiting. It comes down to these last couple of recruiting classes, the freshmen coming in, and then also the class from 2021. Those young players that maybe didn't do a whole lot last year, they have a chance to step up. And it's just the overall roster talent. That's why I have Texas A&M here at number 3. You got a couple of options at quarterback with Haynes King and then also Max Johnson transferring in, a guy with some experience. So, yeah, Texas A&M on paper, looking at the roster, because of all the talent, they should be pretty good, but it's a lot of inexperienced talent. How will it all come together? That'll be really interesting. We'll see how, it's a team that I think will be much better at the end of the season than they are at the beginning of the season just because of the youth, but it's talented youth. I mean, they've got plenty of talent. They didn't really do anything in the transfer portal besides Max Johnson because they've got all this talent on the roster. But again, experience will be lacking here with Texas A&M, and that's why I think they're closer to some of these other teams than they are to Georgia and Alabama. But let's go to number 2 now. It is Georgia, the team that won the national championship, of course, this past season. And I'm not going to spend much time on these last 2 teams because we all know how good they're going to be. We know they're the top 2 teams. There's potential for Georgia to drop off this year. I don't think that's going to happen just because of the way they have recruited and just the program that they have built. But yeah, they do lose some really good players. I mean, you can go down the list. I think they have 15 players drafted. This was a really, really talented team last year. But they've recruited right there with Alabama. They've got guys that should be ready to step up for them. And I'm just not really all that worried about Georgia. Stetson Bennett back at quarterback. For all the complaints you get about him, he's a good quarterback. I mean, he just is. And they've got weapons all around him. You're talking about Brock Bowers coming back at tight end, best tight end in the country, and plenty of weapons around him. So I think Georgia going to be really good. More losses really on the defensive side of the ball, but that's where they have done the best job of developing players. And so I'm just not that concerned about them on defense. I think Georgia will once again be right there at the top of the SEC East. And then number 1, for me, it's Alabama. And I mean, this team is absolutely loaded. I just talked about, Georgia and Texas A&M. They didn't really add much in the transfer portal because they've recruited so well. Well, Alabama's recruited really well also, and they've also added in the transfer portal. They added Jermaine Burton and Jahmyr Gibbs. They had a speedster wide receiver from Louisville. I mean, this team it's unreal how good I think that they're going to be this year. I think they're clearly going to be the best team in the country. You got Bryce Young back at quarterback, a stable of running backs, wide receivers. Offensive line was a concern for them last year. We'll see how that plays out. I mean, that could be an Achilles heel. If there is an issue for Alabama, it's going to be on that offensive line. And if they struggle there, you never know. Maybe someone could upset them. But if they can shore up that offensive line, this team's going to be pretty much impossible to beat, except maybe against one of the elite teams that maybe has a chance against them. And then on defense, they have a ton of guys coming back. Will Anderson, I think, will be the best player in the country. I think he was the best player in the country last year. And they're deep. They're talented. They got guys that could have went to the NFL that came back. Very similar to 2020 when they had that team, all those guys coming back and they were loaded. I think this 2022 team could be very similar to that 2020 team, and that's why I have them as the favorite to win it all. And of course, number 1 team here in our SEC post-spring power rankings. Would love to get your thoughts on this. How would you rank the teams? What would you change? Again, I think it's very close from 3 to 11. Maybe you'd move some of those teams around. I wouldn't change the top 3 or the top 2 or the bottom 3, though. I think those are pretty set. But how would you rank them? Give me your rankings down in the comments below, your thoughts on my rankings. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.